The woman with calloused hands and a tool belt slung low around her waist had seen plenty of broken things in her 23 years, but nothing quite prepared her for the sight of Brennan Rollins standing in the middle of his collapsed fence line, looking more defeated than any man she had ever encountered. It was May of 1883 in Castle Dome, Arizona Territory, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the dry earth as Kendra Morrison climbed down from her wagon, surveying the damage with a practiced eye that her father had trained into her before consumption took him 6 months prior. "You the fence builder advertised in the Castle Dome paper?" Brennan asked, his voice rough as sandpaper, blue eyes squinting against the glare. He was perhaps 28, tall and lean with dark hair that needed cutting, wearing dusty work clothes that had seen better days. His ranch house sat about 50 yards back, a modest structure that looked as weathered as its owner. "Kendra Morrison," she said, extending her hand in a firm shake that surprised him. Most women in the territory did not offer handshakes, but Kendra had learned her trade from her father and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew their worth. "My father was Samuel Morrison. Built half the fences between here and Yuma before he passed. I have taken over the business." Brennan's grip was strong but brief, and she noticed the way his gaze lingered on her face for just a moment before he looked away, as if unused to looking anyone directly in the eye for long. "Brennan Rollins, I appreciate you coming out. Storm last week took down nearly 100 yards of fencing. My cattle have been wandering, and I cannot afford to lose any more stock." Kendra walked the fence line, noting where the posts had rotted through at the base, where the wire had snapped, and where the wood had simply given up under the force of wind and rain. It was extensive damage, but nothing she could not handle. She had rebuilt worse in the months since taking over her father's business, proving to skeptical ranchers and homesteaders that a woman could swing a hammer and set a post just as well as any man. "I can have this done in 4 days," she said, pulling out a small notebook where she tracked materials and costs. "Maybe 5 if the ground is harder than it looks. I will need to bring in new posts, fresh wire, and some cross beams. The old wood is too far gone to salvage much." "4 days," Brennan repeated, and something in his voice made her look up. He was staring out at the open range where his cattle dotted the landscape, but his expression was distant, haunted even. "Has been a long time since anyone stayed around here that long. You live alone out here?" she asked, though the answer was obvious from the single horse in the small corral, the lack of any other signs of human habitation. 3 years now," he said quietly. "Wife died in childbirth. Baby did not make it either. Been just me and the cattle since then." The words hung in the desert air between them, heavy with a grief that Kendra recognized all too well. She had lost her mother to fever when she was 16, and her father just months ago. Loneliness was something she understood in her bones. "I am sorry for your loss," she said, and meant it. "I will start tomorrow at first light. I have most of the materials in my wagon, but I will need to make a run into town for additional posts. My rate is fair, and I do good work that will last." Brennan nodded, finally turning to look at her fully. "You can use the barn to store your materials. There is a pump by the house for water. If you need anything else, just ask." "I will manage fine," Kendra assured him. "I have been doing this long enough to know what I need." She spent the rest of that afternoon unloading materials and assessing the full scope of the work. Brennan kept his distance, working with his cattle in the far pasture, but she caught him glancing her way more than once. She was used to men watching her work with skepticism, waiting for her to fail or ask for help, but something about Brennan's gaze felt different. It was not doubt she saw there, but rather a kind of bewildered curiosity, as if he could not quite figure out what to make of her. That evening, as she prepared to head back to the small room she rented above the general store in Castle Dome, Brennan approached her wagon. "It is a long ride back to town," he said, awkward and uncertain. "You are welcome to use the spare room in the house. Save you the trip back and forth." Kendra hesitated. It was not proper for an unmarried woman to stay in a man's house, even with separate rooms. But the ride to town was indeed long, and starting work at first light would be much easier if she was already here. Besides, there was something in Brennan's face that told her he was offering not out of impropriety, but out of simple, decent hospitality tinged with loneliness. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "If you are certain it would not be an imposition." "House is too quiet anyway," he replied, then seemed to catch himself as if he had revealed too much. "I mean it would be practical, for the work." She nodded, gathering her personal belongings from the wagon. Brennan led her into the house, which was clean but sparse, bearing all the marks of a man who had stopped caring about comfort or decoration. There were no curtains on the windows, no pictures on the walls, nothing to suggest that this was a home rather than just a place to sleep between long days of work. The spare room was small but adequate, with a bed, a chair, and a washstand. "I will have supper ready in about an hour," Brennan said from the doorway. "Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, but you are welcome to join me." "That would be nice," Kendra said, setting her bag down on the chair. "Thank you." She washed the dust from her face and hands, changed into a clean shirt, and emerged to find Brennan moving around the small kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had learned to cook by necessity rather than skill. The beans were indeed simple, but hearty, and the cornbread was only slightly burned around the edges. They ate in relative silence at first, the awkwardness of two strangers sharing a meal settling between them. But gradually, Kendra began to ask questions about the ranch, about the cattle, about how long he had been working this land. Brennan answered slowly at first, then with growing ease, as if he had forgotten how to make conversation and was rediscovering the rhythm of it. "Bought this place 5 years ago," he said, pushing beans around his plate. "My wife, Margaret, she loved it out here, said it was peaceful, said we would raise a family, build something that would last." His voice grew rough. "Did not work out that way. My father used to say that the desert takes and gives in equal measure," Kendra offered quietly. "It took my mother, but it gave my father a trade that fed us both. It took him too, eventually, but it gave me the skills to survive on my own." Brennan looked at her with something like recognition in his eyes. "You understand, then, what it is like to lose everything and have to keep going anyway." "I do," she said simply. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Kendra stared at the ceiling and thought about the broken man trying to hold together a ranch and a life that had fallen apart 3 years ago. She thought about grief and loneliness, and the way some people retreated so far into themselves that they forgot how to reach out. She thought about broken fences and wondered if they were easier to fix than broken hearts. Morning came early, as it always did in the desert. Kendra was up before dawn, pulling on her work clothes and braiding her dark blonde hair back tightly. She found coffee already brewed in the kitchen, and a note from Brennan saying he had gone out to check on the cattle and would be back around midday. She poured herself a cup and headed out to begin work. The fence posts were set in hard, packed earth that required significant effort to dig out and replace. She worked steadily through the cool morning hours, using her post-hole digger to create new holes at regular intervals, then setting the fresh posts with careful precision. Her father had taught her that a fence was only as good as its foundation, and she took pride in doing the work properly. By the time Brennan returned around noon, she had replaced a dozen posts and was stringing new wire between them. He watched her work for a few minutes without speaking, and when she finally looked up, she caught an expression on his face that was hard to read. "You really know what you are doing," he said, and it was not a question. "My father did not believe in raising a helpless daughter," Kendra replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Said everyone should know how to work with their hands, regardless of whether they were born male or female. Got plenty of strange looks for it, but he did not care. He sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew," she said softly, returning to her work. Brennan disappeared into the house and returned a short time later with sandwiches and water. They sat in the shade of her wagon and ate, watching the cattle graze in the distance. "Can I ask you something?" Brennan said suddenly, his voice uncertain. "Sure." "Why did you keep the business after your father died? Most women would have sold it, found other work, maybe married." Kendra considered the question carefully. "Because it is all I have left of him, because I am good at it. Because I do not need a husband to define who I am or what I can do with my life." She paused. "And because maybe I am not ready to stop being my father's daughter and become somebody's wife." Brennan nodded slowly. "Margaret used to say something similar. She wanted to be a teacher, but her family pushed her toward marriage instead. She taught the ranch children when she could, set up a little school in our barn. After she died, I did not have the heart to keep it going." "That must have been hard," Kendra said, "losing her and the baby both." "It broke something in me," Brennan admitted, staring down at his hands. "I stopped talking to people, stopped going to town except when I had to. Threw myself into the ranch work because it was easier than thinking about what I had lost. Been that way for 3 years now." He looked up at her then, his blue eyes dark with pain. "I know people in town talk about me, the hermit rancher who lost his mind along with his family." "I have not heard anyone say that," Kendra said honestly, "but even if they did, people talk about me too. The strange woman who thinks she can do a man's job, the one who should have found a husband by now. You learn to stop listening after a while." Something shifted in Brennan's expression, a slight softening around his eyes. "I suppose we are both odd ones then." "I suppose we are," Kendra agreed with a small smile. They returned to work, but the conversation had created a subtle shift between them. Brennan began finding reasons to be near where she was working, helping to hold posts steady while she packed dirt around their bases, fetching tools she needed before she asked for them. They talked more easily now, about small things at first, then gradually about deeper subjects. That evening, over another simple meal, Brennan asked about her childhood, and Kendra found herself telling stories about growing up with a father who defied convention, about learning to use tools before she learned to sew, about the freedom she had felt working alongside him under the vast Arizona sky. "He sounds like he raised you right," Brennan said. "To be independent and strong." "He did," Kendra agreed. "But he also taught me that strength is not the same as hardness, that you can be tough and still have a soft heart. I think maybe that is a lesson some people forget." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "I have spent 3 years hardening myself, thought it would hurt less that way." "Has it worked?" Kendra asked gently. "No," he admitted. "Just made me lonelier." The honesty of the statement hung between them, vulnerable and raw. Kendra reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of comfort and understanding. Brennan looked down at where her fingers had rested, even after she withdrew them, as if the simple human contact had startled him. The second day of work progressed much like the first. Kendra worked steadily under the climbing sun, replacing posts and stringing wire with practiced efficiency. But now Brennan worked alongside her more openly, not just helping but engaging in the labor itself. He was strong and capable, and she appreciated having assistance with the heavier posts. They developed a rhythm together, an unspoken coordination that made the work go faster. Kendra would measure and mark where each post should go, and Brennan would dig the holes with powerful, focused effort. She would set the posts while he held them steady, and together they would pack the earth firm around the base. It was good, honest work, and there was something satisfying about doing it alongside someone who understood the value of labor. During a mid-afternoon break, sitting in the shade with canteens of water, Brennan turned to her with an expression that was both nervous and determined. "Can I ask you something that might seem strange?" Kendra nodded, curious. "You fixed my fence," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "Or you are fixing it, I mean, but I was wondering." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Wondering what?" she prompted gently. Brennan took a deep breath. "Could you fix my broken heart instead? Or teach me how to fix it myself? Because I have tried for 3 years and I cannot seem to figure it out, but watching you work, seeing how you take broken things and make them whole again, I keep thinking that maybe you would know how." The vulnerability in his voice caught Kendra completely off guard. She had been asked many things in her line of work, but never something like this. Never something so honest and desperate and human. "Brennan," she said softly, "I am a fence builder. I work with wood and wire and nails." "Hearts are different, are they though?" he asked, his blue eyes searching her face. "Both can be broken. Both need mending. Both need someone who knows what they are doing to put them back together properly." He shook his head. "I know it sounds foolish. Maybe I have been alone too long. But you are the first person in 3 years who has looked at me like I am still human. The first person I have talked to about anything real, and I just thought maybe." "Maybe what?" Kendra asked, her own heart beating faster. "Maybe you could stay," he said quietly, "after the fence is done. Not to work, but to, I do not know, help me remember how to live again. Help me remember that there is more to life than just surviving day to day." Kendra looked at this lonely cowboy with his broken heart and his desperate hope, and she felt something shift inside her chest. She had spent 6 months protecting herself from grief by throwing herself into work, just as he had spent 3 years doing the same. They were both running from pain, both hiding behind labor and solitude. "I cannot promise to fix your heart," she said carefully. "But I can promise to be honest with you. And the honest truth is that I think maybe we are both breaking in similar ways. Maybe we could help each other figure out how to heal." Relief washed over Brennan's face so profoundly that Kendra realized how much courage it had taken for him to ask. "That would be enough," he said. "More than enough." They returned to work, but everything felt different now. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the fragile hope that maybe loneliness did not have to be permanent. They talked more as they worked, sharing stories about their pasts, their losses, their fears. Brennan told her about Margaret, about the dreams they had shared, about the unbearable pain of losing both wife and child in a single night. "The midwife said sometimes these things just happen," he said, his voice heavy with old grief. "Said there was nothing anyone could have done. But I kept thinking, if only I had gotten her to town sooner, if only we had had a real doctor instead of just the midwife, if only I had somehow done something different, maybe they would both still be alive." "You cannot carry that guilt forever," Kendra said gently. "It will destroy you from the inside out." "I know," Brennan admitted, "but knowing and letting go are 2 different things." Kendra understood that better than she could say. She told him about her father's death, about watching consumption slowly steal his strength until he could no longer work, could barely breathe. About how she had felt helpless and angry and desperately sad all at once. "I kept thinking I should have noticed the signs earlier," she said. "Should have made him rest more, should have gotten him to see a doctor sooner. But he was stubborn and he loved working, and by the time we realized how bad it was too late. "We both carry ghosts," Brennan observed. "Yes," Kendra agreed, "but maybe ghosts do not have to haunt us forever. Maybe we can learn to live with them without letting them consume us." That night after supper, they sat on Brennan's porch and watched the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The evening air was cooler now, pleasant after the heat of the day. "I have not sat out here in 3 years," Brennan said quietly. "Margaret and I used to sit here every evening and watch the sunset. After she died, it hurt too much to do it alone." "Does it still hurt?" Kendra asked. "Yes," he said honestly, "but less than I expected. Having someone to share it with makes a difference." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the evening sounds of the desert, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets beginning their nightly song. Kendra found herself acutely aware of Brennan beside her, of the solid warmth of his presence, of the way his shoulder was just inches from hers. "Thank you," Brennan said suddenly. "For what?" "For not thinking I am crazy, for listening, for being here." "You are not crazy," Kendra assured him. "Just grieving. There is a difference." The third day of work brought them past the halfway point on the fence. The new post stood straight and strong, the wire was taut and properly secured, and the work was progressing well ahead of schedule. Kendra had always been efficient, but having Brennan's help made everything go faster. They worked well together, she realized. Their movements had become synchronized, anticipating what the other needed before words were necessary. It was the kind of partnership that developed between people who paid attention to each other, who cared about doing things right. Around mid-morning, a rider approached from the direction of town. He was an older man with a sheriff's badge, and his expression was friendly but curious as he dismounted. "Brennan," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Heard you had someone out here working on your fence. Thought I would stop by and make sure everything was all right." "Sheriff Dalton," Brennan replied, shaking the man's hand. "Everything is fine. This is Kendra Morrison. She took over her father's fence building business." The sheriff turned to Kendra with evident surprise. "Samuel Morrison's daughter. I heard he passed. Sorry for your loss. He did good work." "Thank you," Kendra said, shaking his hand firmly. "I am doing my best to maintain his reputation." "Looks like you are doing fine," the sheriff observed, examining the fence work with an experienced eye. "Clean work, strong posts. Your father taught you well." He turned back to Brennan with a meaningful look. "Good to see you having company out here, Brennan. Been too long since you have had anyone around." "Yes, well," Brennan said, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "The fence needed fixing." "I am sure it did," the sheriff agreed, but there was a knowing quality to his tone that suggested he saw more than just a business transaction happening here. "Well, I will let you folks get back to work. Just wanted to make sure everything was on the up and up. People in town worry about you, Brennan. Good to see you are doing all right." After the sheriff rode away, Kendra turned to Brennan with a questioning look. "People worry about you," Brennan shrugged, embarrassed. "Small town. Not much else to talk about besides the hermit rancher. Sheriff stops by every few months to make sure I have not lost my mind completely." "Have you?" Kendra asked lightly. "The jury is still out," Brennan replied with a hint of humor that surprised them both. It was perhaps the first joke he had made in her presence, and the fact that he could make light of his own struggles seemed like a small but significant step forward. As the day wore on, Kendra found herself thinking about what happened after the fence was finished. She had told Brennan she would help him learn to heal, but what did that actually mean? How did two broken people help each other become whole? And what were these feelings developing in her chest every time Brennan smiled at her, or stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body? She had not come here looking for romance. She had come to build a fence, to earn money, to continue the work her father had started. But life had a way of surprising you, of offering things you did not know you needed until they appeared before you. That evening, Brennan cooked something more ambitious than beans and cornbread. He made a stew with vegetables and beef, and the smell filling the small house was genuinely appetizing. "I used to cook more," he explained, stirring the pot. "Margaret loved trying new recipes. After she died, I stopped bothering. Seemed pointless to cook for just myself." "What changed?" Kendra asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "You are here," Brennan said simply. "Makes it seem worth the effort again." They ate the stew with fresh bread that Brennan had apparently ridden into town to purchase that afternoon. And Kendra had to admit it was the best meal she had eaten since her father died. Not because the food was extraordinary, but because it was made with care and shared with someone whose company she genuinely enjoyed. After dinner, they returned to the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Brennan pointed out constellations, telling her stories his father had told him about the patterns in the sky. Kendra listened, watching his face more than the stars, seeing how animation transformed his features when he talked about something that mattered to him. "You should do that more often," she said when he finished a story about Orion the hunter. "Do what? Light up like that when you talk. You have a good face when you are not hiding behind grief." Brennan looked at her, surprise and something else flickering in his eyes. "No one has said anything like that to me in a long time." "Then people have not been paying enough attention," Kendra said boldly. The moment stretched between them, charged with an awareness that was impossible to ignore. Brennan leaned slightly closer, and Kendra found herself doing the same, drawn by an attraction that had been building since the first day but was only now becoming impossible to deny. "Kendra," Brennan said softly, her name sounding different in his voice, weighted with meaning. "I know I have no right to ask, but would you consider staying on after the fence is finished, not as a worker but as—" He paused, searching for words. "As someone who matters to me, because you do. Matter, I mean. More than I thought anyone could after Margaret." Kendra's heart hammered in her chest. "I matter to you." "Yes," Brennan said with absolute certainty. "You have reminded me what it feels like to be alive instead of just existing. You have made me want to cook real meals and watch sunsets and tell stories about stars. You have made me hope that maybe my life is not over just because the life I planned did not work out." "Brennan," Kendra breathed, overwhelmed by the honesty of his words. "I am not asking you to replace Margaret," he continued quickly. "I would never ask that. But I am asking if maybe there could be room in my life for something new, someone new, if maybe we could see where this leads." Kendra thought about her small rented room above the general store, about traveling from ranch to ranch building fences for people she would never see again, about the loneliness she had been denying since her father died. She thought about Brennan's blue eyes and gentle hands and broken heart that was trying so hard to heal. She thought about how natural it felt to be here, to share meals and conversation and quiet evenings under the stars. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like to see where this leads." The smile that broke across Brennan's face was like sunrise, transforming him completely. He reached for her hand, tentative and hopeful, and when she laced her fingers through his, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. They sat there on the porch long into the night, holding hands and talking about possibilities, about futures that neither of them had dared to imagine just days before. And when Kendra finally retired to the spare room, she lay awake feeling something she had not felt in months: genuine happiness. The fourth day of work progressed with an undercurrent of excitement that neither of them tried to hide. They were more than halfway done with the fence now, and every post they set, every wire they strung, brought them closer to a decision point that felt monumental. "What will you do with your father's business if you stay?" Brennan asked as they worked together to secure a particularly stubborn post. "I do not have to give it up entirely," Kendra said thoughtfully. "I could still take jobs in the area, still build fences for people who need them. Just come home here between jobs instead of going back to that room in town." "Home," Brennan repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Kendra admitted. They worked steadily through the day, making excellent progress. By evening, the fence was nearly complete, with only a small section remaining for the next day. The thought that their time working together was almost over created a bittersweet feeling in Kendra's chest. That night, Brennan built a fire in the stone fireplace despite the warmth of the evening, saying he wanted to do something special. He had bought wine in town, something he admitted he had not had in the house since Margaret died, and he poured them each a glass. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To fixing what is broken," Kendra added, clinking her glass against his. They sat by the fire, closer together than they had been before, talking about the practical aspects of building a life together. Brennan wanted to expand his cattle operation, maybe hire a hand or two now that he felt capable of dealing with other people again. Kendra wanted to continue her work, but also maybe teach her skills to others, to pass on what her father had taught her. "We could rebuild the schoolhouse," Brennan suggested quietly. "The one Margaret started. You could teach fence building and practical skills. I know there are other girls out there like you who would benefit from learning trades instead of just needlework and cooking." Kendra looked at him with new appreciation. "You would do that. Honor her memory that way." "I think she would have liked you," Brennan said. "She would have admired what you do, how you refuse to let society's expectations limit you. And I think she would want me to be happy again, to build a new life while still remembering what we had." "Tell me about her," Kendra said gently. "Really tell me. I want to know who she was." So Brennan talked about Margaret, about her quick laugh and her determination to educate children in a territory that often undervalued learning. He talked about how she had defied her own family's expectations to marry him and move to this isolated ranch. He talked about her dreams and her kindness and her courage. And as he talked, Kendra realized that he was not holding onto Margaret's ghost anymore. He was honoring her memory while opening his heart to something new. It was a beautiful thing to witness, this man learning to grieve healthily while allowing himself to hope again. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Kendra said when he finished. "She was," Brennan agreed, "and I will always love her. But I am beginning to understand that loving someone I lost does not mean I cannot love someone new. The heart is bigger than I thought. There is room for both." "I think my father would have liked you too," Kendra said. "He always said the measure of a man was not in how he handled success, but in how he got back up after being knocked down. You have been knocked down hard, Brennan, but you are getting back up. That takes real strength." Brennan set down his wine glass and turned to face her fully. "I could not have done it without you. You did not just fix my fence, Kendra. You fixed something in me that I thought was broken beyond repair." "You fixed something in me too," she admitted. "I have been so focused on working, on proving myself, on being strong that I forgot it was okay to need someone, to want someone. You reminded me of that." They moved closer together as naturally as breathing, and when Brennan cupped her face in his rough, gentle hands, Kendra's heart soared. The kiss they shared was soft and sweet and full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. It tasted like hope and healing and the possibility of building something beautiful from broken pieces. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Brennan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not just for a while. Stay and build a life here. Marry me, Kendra Morrison. Help me turn this lonely ranch into a real home." It was fast, perhaps faster than was sensible, but Kendra had learned that life was too short to waste time on caution when something felt this right. "Yes," she said, joy flooding through her. "Yes, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, deeper this time, full of passion and commitment and the sweet relief of two lonely souls finding each other in the vast emptiness of the Arizona territory. The fifth day dawned bright and clear, and they finished the fence work by mid-morning. Standing back to admire the completed job, Kendra felt a mix of pride and bittersweetness. This fence had brought them together, and now it was done. But unlike other jobs she had completed, this one was not an ending but a beginning. "Best fence I have ever seen," Brennan said, wrapping his arm around her waist in a gesture that already felt familiar and right. "Best job I have ever done," Kendra agreed, leaning into his solid warmth. They spent the afternoon making plans. Brennan wanted to marry her as soon as possible, not out of impropriety but out of genuine eagerness to start their life together. Kendra agreed, seeing no reason to delay when they were both certain of what they wanted. They rode into Castle Dome together the next day, causing quite a stir among the townspeople who had grown accustomed to seeing Brennan only on rare, necessary occasions. Sheriff Dalton greeted them with a knowing smile that suggested he had suspected something like this might happen. "Come to make things official, have you?" he asked. "We would like to get married," Brennan confirmed, his hand firmly holding Kendra's. "As soon as it can be arranged." The sheriff, who also served as a justice of the peace, was more than happy to help. "How about tomorrow afternoon? Give you time to get what you need. Let me spread the word to folks who might want to attend." "Tomorrow sounds perfect," Kendra said, smiling up at Brennan. They spent the rest of the day making preparations. Kendra bought a simple but pretty dress from the general store, pale blue with white lace trim. Brennan got a haircut and bought a new shirt. They purchased rings from the jeweler, simple gold bands that would symbolize their commitment. Word spread quickly through the small town, and people's reactions ranged from surprise to delight to "I knew it would happen" satisfaction. The women who ran the boarding house insisted on baking a cake, and the owner of the saloon offered his best whiskey for a toast. That evening, staying in separate rooms at the boarding house to maintain propriety for their last night as unmarried individuals, Kendra sat by the window and thought about how dramatically her life had changed in just 5 days. She had come here to fix a fence and ended up finding a partner, a home, and a future she had not even known she wanted. The wedding took place in the small church on the edge of town, with a surprising number of people in attendance. It seemed the whole town had turned out to witness the hermit rancher, and the fence-building woman pledge their lives to each other. Sheriff Dalton officiated with appropriate solemnity, though his eyes twinkled with approval. "Do you, Brennan Rollins, take Kendra Morrison to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Brennan said firmly. His blue eyes locked on Kendra's face with absolute certainty. "And do you, Kendra Morrison, take Brennan Rollins to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Kendra said, her voice strong and sure. They exchanged rings, and when the sheriff pronounced them husband and wife, Brennan kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one set of eyes in the congregation. The broken-hearted cowboy had found love again, and the independent fence builder had found a partner who valued her strength rather than being threatened by it. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. The townspeople brought food and good wishes, and for the first time in 3 years, Brennan seemed fully present, laughing and talking with people instead of withdrawing into himself. Kendra stood beside him, her hand in his, and felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. As the sun began to set, they made their excuses and rode back to the ranch together, this time as husband and wife. The fence Kendra had built stood strong and straight, enclosing Brennan's land and his cattle, a testament to her skill and the journey that had brought them together. That night, in the house that was now truly theirs, they loved each other with the passion of two people who had been alone too long, and the tenderness of two hearts learning to trust again. And later, lying in each other's arms, they talked about the future they would build together. "I want children," Brennan said quietly, his hand resting on her stomach. "If you do, I want to fill this house with life and love and laughter, but only if that is what you want too." "I want that," Kendra assured him. "I want to build a family with you. I want to teach our children how to work with their hands and stand on their own feet. I want them to know both of us, the strength we found individually and the strength we have together." "And the school?" Brennan asked. "Do you still want to do that?" "Yes," Kendra said. "Let us rebuild Margaret's school. Let us make it a place where anyone can learn practical skills, regardless of whether they are male or female. Let us honor her memory by continuing her work." Brennan kissed her forehead. "I love you, Kendra Rollins. Thank you for fixing more than just my fence." "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for asking me to fix your broken heart. I think in the process, we fixed mine too." The seasons turned as they always did in the Arizona territory. Summer gave way to fall and fall to winter and winter to spring again. Kendra continued to take fence-building jobs in the area, but now she came home to Brennan each evening, to a house that had slowly transformed from a lonely shell into a warm home. They worked together to rebuild the schoolhouse on the ranch property, creating a space where Kendra could teach practical skills, and where the ranch children from surrounding properties could come to learn. It became known throughout the area as a place where girls were encouraged just as much as boys, where working with your hands was valued as highly as book learning. Brennan's cattle operation expanded as he found the energy and focus he had lost during his years of grief. He hired 2 ranch hands, young men who appreciated working for someone who treated them fairly and valued hard work. The ranch became profitable again, and with it came a sense of purpose and pride. In the spring of 1884, Kendra discovered she was pregnant. The news brought mixed emotions for Brennan, joy tangled with the memory of losing Margaret and their child. But Kendra held his hands and looked into his eyes and reminded him that fear could not control their lives. "We will face this together," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, we will face it together. But I am strong and I have a good feeling about this. We are going to be parents, Brennan. We are going to bring new life into this home we have built." Her confidence helped steady him, and as her pregnancy progressed, his fears gradually gave way to excitement. He was attentive and caring, making sure she did not overwork herself, though Kendra insisted on maintaining her activities right up until the last few weeks. On a cold December morning, with the help of a midwife from town and with Brennan holding her hand through every moment, Kendra gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Kendra's father, and Brennan wept with relief and joy as he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Brennan whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "You are perfect. Thank you, Kendra. Thank you for giving me this. We gave each other this, Kendra corrected gently, exhausted but radiant. We built this together. Little Samuel thrived, growing strong and healthy. He had his mother's determination and his father's gentle nature, and watching him grow became one of the greatest joys of their lives. The house that had once been so silent and empty now rang with baby cries and laughter, and the sounds of a family living fully. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Margaret Rose, honoring Brennan's first wife while giving their daughter her own identity. She came into the world with a fierce cry and bright, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. I think Margaret would have approved, Brennan said, holding his daughter while his son climbed onto the bed beside Kendra. I think she would be happy that her name lives on in someone so loved. I think so too, Kendra agreed, watching her husband with their children and feeling her heart swell with love. The school on their property continued to grow and thrive. Kendra taught fence building, basic carpentry, animal husbandry, and other practical skills. She became known throughout the territory as a woman who believed in empowering others, particularly young women, to be self-sufficient and capable. Students came from miles around to learn from her, and many went on to start their own businesses or improve their families' homesteads with their new skills. Brennan supported her work fully, often teaching alongside her when his ranch duties allowed. He shared his knowledge of cattle management and land stewardship, and together they created an educational program that was ahead of its time in its progressive views. As the years passed, their love deepened and matured. They faced challenges together, as all couples do, from harsh winters that threatened their cattle to droughts that tested their resilience. But they met each obstacle as partners, drawing strength from each other and from the foundation of trust and respect they had built. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, they stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was 9 now, already showing an aptitude for ranch work and an interest in his mother's building skills. Margaret Rose was 7, bright and curious, equally comfortable helping her father with the cattle or her mother in the workshop. "Do you ever regret it?" Brennan asked, his arm around Kendra's waist. "Giving up traveling from job to job, settling down here with me?" "Not for a single moment," Kendra said honestly. "I found everything I needed right here. A home, a partner, a family, work that matters. What could I possibly regret?" "I just want you to know," Brennan said, turning to face her, "that you saved my life. When you came here to fix that fence, I was barely existing. I had convinced myself that I would spend the rest of my days alone, that I did not deserve happiness after losing Margaret. But you showed me that grief does not have to be the end of the story, that broken things can be mended, that hearts can heal and love again. You saved my life too," Kendra said, reaching up to touch his face. "I was so focused on being strong and independent that I was not letting myself need anyone. You reminded me that being strong does not mean being alone, that I could be capable and self-sufficient while still being part of a partnership. You gave me a home and a family, and showed me that I did not have to choose between being myself and being loved." They kissed, a gentle affirmation of the love they had built over a decade of shared life. In the yard, their children laughed, chasing each other around the fence posts that their mother had built 10 years ago, posts that still stood strong and straight, holding everything together. More years passed, bringing more changes and more growth. A third child arrived in 1895, another boy they named Thomas, who came into the world with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. The school expanded, eventually becoming recognized by the territorial government as a legitimate educational institution, one of the few in Arizona that actively encouraged female students to learn trades. Brennan's ranch became one of the most successful in the region, not just because of the quality of his cattle, but because of his reputation as a fair employer, and a man who had overcome tragedy to build something meaningful. People respected him, and more importantly, people liked working for him. Kendra's fence-building business evolved into something larger. She trained apprentices, both male and female, who went on to work throughout the territory. She wrote a manual on proper fence construction that became widely used, and her name became synonymous with quality work and fair dealing. But beyond their professional successes, what mattered most was the life they had built together. The house that had once been so empty was now full of noise and activity and love. The ranch that had been maintained by one lonely man was now a thriving operation that employed several families and supported the local community. Their children grew strong and capable, learning from both parents' examples. Samuel eventually took over more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for animal management and land stewardship. Margaret Rose became fascinated with her mother's work, learning not just fence building but expanding into furniture making and carpentry. Thomas, the youngest, showed an aptitude for teaching, often helping in the school from a young age. In 1903, 20 years after Kendra had first arrived to fix that broken fence, they celebrated their anniversary surrounded by family and friends. Their children were grown now. Samuel married with a child of his own. Margaret Rose engaged to a young blacksmith from town. Thomas about to head off to a teaching college in California. Sheriff Dalton, much older now but still sharp-eyed and friendly, attended the celebration. "I remember when you two got married," he said, raising a glass of whiskey and toast. "Half the town thought it was too fast, that it would not last, but I knew better. I saw the way you looked at each other even after just a few days. Sometimes when something is right, you just know." "We knew," Brennan agreed, his hand finding Kendra's automatically, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "We definitely knew," Kendra confirmed, smiling at her husband with the same warmth that had been there from the beginning. That evening, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet again, they returned to their porch, to the spot where they had first held hands and talked about possibilities. The fence Kendra had built still stood, though it had been repaired and maintained over the years. The ranch stretched out before them, peaceful and prosperous in the twilight. 20 years, Brennan mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like it has only been a few days since you drove up in that wagon with your tools and your capable hands. "A lot has happened in 20 years, Kendra said. "We have built so much together, not just buildings and fences, but a family, a community, a life worth living." "You remember what I asked you," Brennan said softly, "after you agreed to fix my fence." "You asked if I could fix your broken heart instead," Kendra replied, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "And do you remember what you said?" "I said I could not promise to fix it, but that I would be honest with you, that maybe we could help each other heal." Brennan pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting against him perfectly after so many years together. "You did fix it," he said quietly. "Not by making me forget the past or replacing what I lost, but by showing me that life goes on. That there is room in the heart for both grief and joy. That broken things can become beautiful again if you take the time to mend them properly." "We mended each other," Kendra said. "That is what real love does. It does not erase the pain, but it makes it bearable. It does not replace what was lost, but it builds something new alongside the memories. We took our broken pieces and created something whole." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast Arizona sky. The desert night was cool and peaceful, full of the sounds they had heard together for 20 years. Cattle settling in for the night, the distant cry of a coyote, the wind whispering through the fence posts and over the land they had made their home. "I love you, Kendra Rollins," Brennan said, the words as heartfelt as they had been the first time he said them. "Thank you for answering that advertisement in the paper. Thank you for fixing my fence. Thank you for staying." "I love you too, Brennan Rollins," Kendra replied. "Thank you for asking me to fix your broken heart. Thank you for letting me help you heal. Thank you for building this life with me." They stayed on the porch long into the night, talking and laughing and remembering the journey that had brought them here. A journey that had started with a broken fence and a lonely cowboy and a woman with calloused hands who knew how to fix things. A journey that had led to a love story neither of them had expected, but both of them cherished with everything they had. The years continued to roll forward, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, bringing changes to the Arizona territory as it moved toward statehood, bringing new challenges and new joys. But through it all, Brennan and Kendra remained constant, their love a steady foundation that supported not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. The school they had built continued long after they were able to actively teach, taken over by their son Thomas and eventually by their granddaughter, who inherited Kendra's passion for empowering others through practical education. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and later his children's. Margaret Rose's furniture business became renowned throughout the Southwest, her pieces sought after for their beauty and craftsmanship. On their 40th anniversary in 1923, Brennan and Kendra were surrounded by 4 generations of family. They were in their 60s now, still strong but bearing the marks of a life well lived. Brennan's hair was silver, his face lined with years of sun and work. Kendra's hands were more gnarled than they had been, arthritis making some tasks difficult, but she still had the same determined fire in her eyes. "Tell us the story," their youngest great-grandchild demanded, climbing into Kendra's lap. "Tell us about when Grandma came to fix the fence." Kendra and Brennan exchanged amused glances. This story had become family legend, told and retold so many times that the children could probably recite it themselves. "Well," Kendra began, settling the child more comfortably. "It was May of 1883, and I drove up to a ranch where a lonely cowboy stood looking at his broken fence. He needed someone to fix it, so I agreed to take the job. But Grandpa did not just want his fence fixed, did he?" The child interrupted, already knowing the story but wanting to hear it again. "No," Brennan said, his eyes twinkling. "I wanted her to fix my broken heart instead. Because I had been very sad for a very long time, and something about your grandmother made me think that maybe I did not have to be sad forever." "And did she fix it?" the child asked, even though the answer was obvious from the love that still radiated between the two elderly people. "She did," Brennan confirmed. "She fixed it by being patient and kind and honest, by showing me that it was okay to grieve but also okay to live again. By building a life with me one day at a time, the same way she built that fence, with care and skill and determination." "We fixed each other," Kendra added, as she always did when telling this story. "That is what love does. It takes broken things and makes them beautiful again." The child seemed satisfied with this answer and scampered off to play with the other children. Brennan and Kendra sat together, watching their family, the legacy of that choice they had made 40 years ago to take a chance on love. "You think we did well?" Brennan asked quietly, a question he had asked many times over the years. "I think we did perfectly," Kendra assured him, also as she always did. "Look at what we built. Not just children and grandchildren, but a way of life that values both strength and gentleness." work and love, independence and partnership. We showed them that broken things do not have to stay broken. We did indeed, Brennan agreed, pulling her close. After 40 years, her head still fit perfectly against his shoulder. Her hand still fit perfectly in his. They lived several more years together, growing old with grace and dignity, always partners, always best friends, always deeply in love. When Brennan finally passed in 1928 at the age of 73, Kendra held his hand and told him that he had given her the greatest life she could have imagined, that their love had been the best adventure she could have asked for. She followed him a year later, at the age of 68, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all bore the mark of the love story she and Brennan had created. Her last words were about the fence, about how fixing that fence had led to fixing everything else, about how the best decision she had ever made was staying when Brennan asked. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, near where that fence had stood for so many years. The gravestone was simple but meaningful. Brennan Rollins and Kendra Morrison Rollins. They fixed what was broken and built something beautiful. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations. The school continued to educate, expanding and evolving, but always maintaining Kendra's vision of empowerment through practical knowledge. The furniture Margaret Rose had built still graced homes throughout the Southwest. The fence-building techniques Kendra had taught were still being used by her apprentices. But more than any of their physical legacy, what lasted was the story of their love. It became family legend, told and retold about the lonely cowboy with a broken heart and the capable woman who agreed to fix his fence and ended up fixing so much more. About how two broken people found each other in the vast emptiness of the Arizona territory and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on that ranch in Castle Dome, still maintained that original fence line, still told the story of how it all began with an advertisement in a newspaper, and a woman brave enough to answer it. They told it as a reminder that broken things could be mended, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that building something lasting required patience and skill and commitment. The fence had long since been replaced with newer materials, but a section of the original posts was preserved and maintained, a monument to where it all started. Tourists sometimes came to see it, drawn by the story that had spread far beyond the family, the story of the fence builder and the cowboy who found love in the unlikeliest of circumstances. But to the family who lived there, who tended the ranch and taught in the school and built furniture and raised their children with the values Brennan and Kendra had instilled, it was not just a story. It was a living legacy, a reminder that the choices we make can echo through generations. That taking a chance on love, even when it seems too fast or too risky, can lead to something extraordinary. And on quiet evenings when the desert sun set in shades of orange and pink and deep purple, if you stood by that preserved fence line and listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of their voices, the lonely cowboy and the fence builder, talking about stars and dreams and the beautiful life they were just beginning to build together. Almost feel the presence of their love, strong and enduring as the posts Kendra had set with such care, holding everything together even after all these years. The story of Brennan and Kendra Rollins was one of hope and healing, of love found in unexpected places, of two broken people who became whole together. It was a story that deserved to be told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance, from being brave enough to ask for help, from being willing to stay when every instinct says to run. It was a story about fixing fences and fixing hearts, And in the end, those two things turned out to be not so different after all. Both required skill and patience. Both required the willingness to work hard. Both required faith that broken things could be made whole again. And most importantly, both required love. The kind of love that builds rather than tears down, that heals rather than harms, that endures through decades and generations, leaving the world better than it found it. That was the legacy of Brennan and Kendra Rollins, the lonely cowboy and the fence builder who fixed each other's broken hearts and built something beautiful that lasted long after they were gone.